everybody. How are you? Everybody had their coffee? I hope so, because we are going to do a history lesson here a little bit today. And it's going to be a bit of a history lesson on Silicon Valley. I am going to talk a little bit about why does it exist, why is it where it is, what caused it to occur, right? Why is it there? I know there are a bunch of people from Silicon Valley, and we're going to probably have an interesting conversation after that as well. But I think this is a question I get asked a lot as a diplomat. Why did it happen in California? What happened? What are the sequence of events which led up to this phenomenal place, right? So I'll start with a little bit about myself. My name is Aamer Khan. I was born in Karachi, Pakistan. At 17 years of age, I came to Turkey, and I did my electrical engineering here in Orta Teknik Üniversitesi, which is Middle East Technical University, for those of you who don't speak Turkish. Söylüyorlar, ODTÜ'ye girişte zor, çıkışta zor. Tam girişimcilik gibi. Yeah. So it's an honor to be here. Turkey is a country close to my heart. I got my bachelor's degree here. I owe it a lot, and it's an honor to be a U.S. diplomat here. I'm thinking that, so it gave me the right skill set to get to Silicon Valley. I got to Silicon Valley around '96. I joined a company called The Well. The Well is one of the original sort of online communities. We'll talk about it in a little bit when I get into the details, but it's one of those original online communities that was formed in Berkeley, California, and the company that I joined was building the software around it. So we'll talk about a story around that in a little bit. I also worked for IBM. Rational, we got bought out. We got bought out and we got rolled up into IBM, and I spent quite a bit of time building a lot of tools. My passion as an engineer was software development tools. So building software that helps software engineers build software, right? So the Eclipse, I don't know if many of you have heard of it. That's one of the projects that I worked on. Eclipse is a software development tool primarily for Java. It's an IDE. But the interesting project that I worked on, which is the real core that I really enjoyed, was software tools for developers, for teams of developers, and creating high-performance software development teams. We can talk about that a little bit later, but it's one of the core things that I worked on. It's getting a large group of people, a large engineering team, to execute together to build a complex piece of software. I think it's one of the hardest things known to mankind. It's an amazingly challenging problem. I worked on a lot of version control software, a lot of requirements management technology, testing tools, and so on. So let's carry on. So the agenda, why does it exist? Why do we have the Valley? We'll talk about a little bit of the history, and we'll talk about some of the key sort of seminal events, and then get to a point where we are talking about maybe more recent times. And then we'll have I'll talk about what I think maybe are the key things that were there, so that caused it to happen, right? I'll also sort of throw in a little bit about my personal experience. I think it's it's relevant to this group. A lot of you are engineers from Turkey who are educated here, and I'm sure want to maybe at some point build a software company in Silicon Valley. So maybe that'll be useful for some of you. Finally, maybe we look at at the more sort of macro level what makes American entrepreneurship work. Again, my personal opinion, not the opinion of the United States government. So it'll be what I think about it. So, again. So caveats, I'm an engineer. I'm not a historian. The story can be told in many different ways, and so there's many perspectives. This is just one possible perspective. And I will definitely miss, in the next 30 minutes, many things that you think are extremely important to the story, right? So no offense, it's just that it's one of the sort of lines you can take through history. We'll surely can talk about a lot of different things that I might not have talked about. So the story kind of begins in 1946. This area, I don't know if you recognize this little map. It's that up there, the blue area, is the San Francisco Bay. This is the southern part of San Francisco Bay, kind of stretching from San Carlos, Redwood City, down to Cupertino and San Jose. It's roughly the sort of the heart of the valley. We're going to sort of look at this map for the next few minutes, and we'll sort of touch upon different things that happen on this map. In 1946, mostly it was orange orchards, right? That was about all there was. Stanford University was still there, but it was more or less a bunch of a place which there was hardly any technology companies anywhere in sight. Stanford University, and this gentleman here, Dr. Thurman, he can be called the father of Silicon Valley. In many terms, he is possibly the father of Silicon Valley. He was an engineer, an electrical engineer. He was during World War II, he was in MIT, and he was a Stanford graduate, and he was working on radio waves. He was working on jamming Nazi radars and working on that technology to jam Nazi radars as American aircraft flew into Germany, right? That was the project he was on. One of the things he observed while in MIT was there was a huge amount of money spent by the US government and a huge amount of money invested by the US government into universities for pure basic research. The total amount of money was $450 million, which is a significant amount, I'm sure, in '46. Most of that money, $117 million, I believe, went to MIT. The next big share was, I think, around $80 million, which went to Caltech. And down the line, Columbia got $30 million, Harvard got $30 million, but Stanford got $50,000. That's all they got. So that didn't really sit with him well. And when he came back in 1946 to Stanford, he decided that he was going to change that. He was going to create a research unit in the engineering school as the dean of engineering in Stanford, something that will attract government funding to build technology. So what did he do? He tried to solve a problem that the US government was trying to solve. This problem was essentially the same problem, this time against the USSR. The idea is to penetrate Russian radar systems, Soviet radar systems, and the customer is primarily the military. He's looking for military funding. He has a lot of contacts all around the military. So what the idea is to get the money so that they can do this basic research to solve the problem. Now, they use microwaves, they use they use tubes, which were the old form of, essentially, there's a replacement for a transistor, and they use those to create disruption systems to jam the radar systems of the Soviet Union. Now, the thing is that this was, again, notice, there's no such thing as a VC here. It's all government money coming to the university, and that's all he's trying to do. Now, the next thing he did, he had a bigger plan than just making the university. He set up what's called the Stanford Industrial Park. You can imagine this to be the first techno park, what you call techno park in Turkey. It's the first technology park in the world. It's essentially set up on about 700 acres today, I think, and it's, at the time, a very few small number of companies joined this park. HP is one of them, Varian, Watkins Johnson, Lockheed. The idea is this: he's going to attract the money for projects from the government. He's going to get the professors to be on the boards of these companies. The graduate students are going to provide essentially pure research, and then eventually the manpower to participate and create technology in these companies. And essentially, the idea is to create a center of gravity around on technology in general. At the time, again, it's still the same old technology. It's the tubes and microwaves and essentially defense projects, right? No real investment from the private sector. In the 50s, there's a breakthrough. This is a critical breakthrough for computing, right? This is the person who makes it happen is Mr. Shockley. He is the inventor of the transistor. He creates this this device, which is now going to be used for eventually for computing and so on, but it's the first transistor. He starts a company called Shockley Transistors. It's in Mountain View, and he is essentially going to create this company which is going to provide the technology that's going to be the basis for computing. The thing is that this guy, Mr. Shockley, is a terrible manager. He is actually hated by most of the people who come to work for him. He's also an interesting character. He seemed to think that his work in eugenics, which is another sort of research interest he had, is more important than his invention of the transistor. Eugenics is this theory that there are certain traits on certain races that make them superior. So he's a pretty interesting character. In any case, so he attracts this company. This company gets a good number of people to join and there's some very key people who join this company, very important people for the history of Silicon Valley. Who are these guys? So they are a group called the Treacherous Eight. We'll talk about them in a little bit later, but these are key important people. This group of 8 people who join his company decide to break away. They decide that they're not going to work with Shockley. It's done. We're leaving. They break away from Shockley and go join a company called Fairchild Semiconductor. A person called Arthur Rock, who's a famous investor. He used to be working, at the time, he was working in a bank in New York, and he organizes the whole setup. So he talks to Fairchild, who's kind of this person who's a bit of a playboy, who he knew in New York. He's the owner of Fairchild, which is a camera company at the time. And what they do is he convinces them to set up a company around these 8 guys, and these 8 guys join Fairchild Semiconductor, and they start building a semiconductor company which is exceptionally, doing exceptional work in the area of building integrated circuits. So what happens? There are 2 people, Mr. Kilby and Mr. Noyce. Both of them invent the integrated circuit. Kilby is from Texas Instruments. Robert Noyce is from Fairchild Semiconductor, and this device is going to be the biggest breakthrough, right? This is the thing that makes the computer revolution happen. What are the reasons? Componentization, miniaturization, mass production. So you can imagine that's the comparison in size from a tube to a transistor to an integrated circuit. So this is the driver. It's a key invention, right, that causes all of this to happen. And Robert Noyce is one of the people who is in the Treacherous Eight from Fairchild, at Fairchild Semiconductor, who creates this and makes it happen. But again, the product they produce is still for the US government. The Aerospace Program, the Fairchild Semiconductor is still a government contractor. The Apollo program, the ballistic missile program, that's where these computers are used. There is no private commercial use of these computers hardly anywhere. The only company that's really significant is IBM, and it's got 81% of the share of the market. But things are about to change. There are certain things that are changing technologically which are going to switch the focus of the valley, right? So again, the US government is involved on all of this peripherally. It's not interested in computer technology. It's interested in missiles and so on, but it's sort of it's generating the engine. It's basically pushing the engine of innovation. So around this time, Robert Noyce, who is one of the senior people at Fairchild Semiconductor, is passed over to become CEO of Fairchild Semiconductor in 1968. So he's the inventor of the integrated circuit. He's passed over. He decides, nope, I'm going to go create my own company. And he creates a company called Integrated Electronics. What's that company? Anybody know Integrated Electronics? It's called Intel, right? So he creates, with another engineer, Gordon Moore. Gordon Moore and Robert Noyce are both of two of the Treacherous Eight. And these guys create the company called Intel. And they mass produce certain consumer-level chips that are critical. Like these are essentially CPUs and memory, 2 key components of the computer, right? The microcomputer. as we know it. This company starts producing these two key components, and then besides Intel, one of the things to remember is that Fairchild Semiconductor had many offsprings, right? It had hundreds of companies that came out of it. Some of these companies, they say that from Fairchild originated some 50 to 80% of the semiconductor market of the world. It's amazing that that one company can produce such an incredible number of companies out of it. Why it happened, it's because of some incredible people there, I'm sure, and then maybe a network, right? A network that was formed at that point in time that created the energy that would, bring funding, bring ideas, bring key people together, and create a large number of companies. So, like Intel, you can see there's National Semiconductor, LSI Logic, AMD. There is an incredible, massive number of just chip companies coming along and being formed out and created. For Intel as well, this person called Arthur Rock was one of the people who was a VC, or who's provided the funding for Intel. He provided $2.5 million of seed capital to create the thing, get Intel going. He is an interesting character because some people say that he may have coined the term venture capitalist. He's one of the very early ones who really created the VC capability in the Valley. Now, the next thing you need for a computer is microchip. You need the chip, the memory, you need the microprocessor, and then you need storage. San Jose Research Labs creates the Winchester hard drive and the floppy disk. At this point, in 1973, 74, you have all the pieces. You have the hard drive, you have the memory, you have the chips, everything is there. And in 1976, 74, 75, there are no commercial microcomputers. There are computers that people are using all over Silicon Valley in their garages, and they're experimenting, they're playing with them, they're doing all kinds of cool stuff. But there isn't a massive market for microcomputers all over the United States or in the world, nowhere, right? Why not? So, but that changes, right? And we know this company, and we know these guys, right? These guys create the first successful microcomputer. And the question is why? Why does that happen? Why does this computer, and not some of the others, Commodore 64, whatever, the many others that you could imagine at that time, why didn't they become successful? Why did not that happen? So the answer is a killer application. And it's in this application right here, right? Dan Bricklin creates this thing called the VisiCalc. And it solves a very important problem. And what's the problem? If you have a 50-person company and you want to do payroll for them, and the only way you had was a ledger, a paper ledger or something, or you didn't have a real application that could solve that basic problem that every business in the world needed to solve, right? And the VisiCalc spreadsheet solves exactly that. And it's a very easy tool that you can use, and it sells like crazy. And Apple II with VisiCalc becomes the most sought-after tool practically in the world at that time. This killer application is a key, right? So this idea of killer applications or killer sort of capabilities for a technology base is critical to make something grow. Now, Silicon Valley is, the fact is that it created all these technologies, but it has to all come together at some point, and these technologies synergize each other and create the next thing coming. Of course, Microsoft and IBM follow right through, and there is a huge outbreak of companies. Many companies come into being around that time, and these hundreds of companies that come out are also just technology companies building on top of an ecosystem that Microsoft created and Apple created, right? And again, the technology is evolving, and technology feeds on each other. And it's concentrated in this location because that's where Apple and some of these people are originating their base technology. And all these people, a lot of them are leaving tech companies that are successful and making their own companies. A lot of them are just people who are moving from company A to company B. There's a large number of partners that who like to work with each other, who like each other's ideas, and they're creating new things. Now, the thing is that this didn't happen all on its own, right? Because to create these companies, to make all of this happen, you needed money. And right along the same time, there are certain places that are becoming very important in the valley. Sandhill Road, I'm sure many of you know this, is the place where you go to get money. And at that time, and it's as early as that Sequoia Capital, KCB, and all these companies are starting to appear. Kleiner Perkins is an interesting example. Eugene Kleiner was also one of the Treacherous Eight, right? He was one of the guys who came out of Fairchild Semiconductor, and he, instead of going and making a technology company, makes a venture capital company. Right? And he creates one of the sort of the famous ones, right? And what happens next? There are a few other things that happen with the U.S. government. There are certain laws that are passed which create a huge amount of money that is now available for venture VC funds, particularly the Retirement Income Security Act, which now makes available pension funds. It allows them to invest in venture capital funds, right? And this large injection of money in '79, right when the microprocessor and microcomputer become viable, and causes a huge, massive growth in the valley, and the money available, and everything goes, goes on fire. The other thing, so I remember, when I first got to the valley, I joined this company called Val Engage, the Val. The owner, the person who had bought the Val was an angel investor, and he hired me to become the director of engineering of the company. So I arrived there, and we start with, okay, what are you going to do? Basically, what he wanted to do was build a massive, take the software and make community software so that we could sell it to a large number of newspapers and so on. So what we started doing was we built this discussion board software, and within a year we had the product. We marketed it, and we got sales to Playboy Magazine, E-Trade, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and essentially this discussion software and this community software was sort of the glue that we would serve out of our servers. It was one of the early software as a service technologies, and it would be given to and attached to all these newspaper sites and so on. So we were selling this, and we were doing very well. 1 year later, he comes back from one of his vacations and comes to our company and says, you know what, I have a new idea. So he says, I said, well, we're making money. We're actually, our burn rate's equaling our income. It's really cool. We're doing well. I'm thinking he's going to now get bigger investors in, so we grow the company. And he says, we're going to do Jenny's Jam. And I'm like, what is Jenny's Jam? So Jenny's Jam is this thing that he says, well, it's a place where people will come and talk to each other, and they will post pictures and like them, and they will do this sort of community thing. And I'm like, hold on a second, are you serious? When we're stops, what do you mean? But we're going to keep selling our software. He says, no, we shut that all down. We've got, we're going to just now build Jenny's Jam. And this, people are going to come and like this stuff, and they're going to click like, and he basically described Facebook to me in '97, '98. And I was lost, and I'm like, how are we going to make money? What's going to happen? So essentially he says, no, this is what we're going to do. So fine, so the golden rule, so the golden rule was, in this business was that he who has the goal makes the rules. So he told us what to do, and we went and started doing it. So finally, I went in and we started building the software. 1 month, about 8 months later, we had the product. It didn't look like Facebook. It was basically a community where we would attract people, and we advertised, we spent money, and nobody came. Nobody came. He looked at it and he says, no, you guys just did it all wrong, so let's do it like this. And we did it again. 6 months later, nobody came. At this time, I'm like, I got frustrated and I left. And of course, I didn't believe anything like that could ever succeed, and of course, I was very wrong. In 2004, Facebook comes along, and it's interesting that one of the things I learned in that little adventure of 2 years of my life was that, one, your investor might be wrong. Two, they might be thinking too far ahead. Doing something too early in time is definitely not necessarily always a positive thing. And that you should have the confidence to say no to your investor. When it's not in the right spot at the right time. But anyway, so the VC piece is a part of the story. Now, we can talk about the internet and how it came along, but essentially the story goes forward. And again, the internet now in 1990 was there, right? In 1990, around that time, we had all the pieces. But again, we needed the killer app, right? And the killer apps essentially started around 94, 95. A lot of the pieces came together, and we then got what we had. Either way, my idea, my thinking around here is that essentially making Silicon Valley what it is, it required many different things. It required the VCs, it required the technologists, it required the initial push, maybe not necessarily intentionally from the United States government, but it required some money to create the center of mass for really strong engineers to collude together. But it also required, I think, a lot of luck to get all the pieces lining up as they went along. And each time the next revolution came, the valley was the place where the fire started, right? I think it still is today the premier place to go and do business. As we saw from since morning, Fadi and Mr. Burton and a few others who presented, he still is one of the centers of the world. $33.4 billion in 2015 are the deals that were made in the Valley, and they're definitely significantly more than most other places, but still, it is the place where people go to when you really want to do something. I'll end with some of the things that, one of my experiences, I guess. So after I left this company, this company, which was the Well, I left that and I started a couple of companies. We got funded. I learned how to read a term sheet. I learned how to get myself funded and launch the company. The exit was harder than getting funded, in fact, in my opinion, and we had to sell the company, a couple of companies on assets. Finally, one day I was just I was consulting at a place, and one of my friends from Benchmark Capital called me and said, "Hey, why don't you come with me and have a look at this company?" So we went there. So I went to this company, and they were investing there. They just wanted a technical review, and I walked in. It was an interesting company. It was a software development company for software tools, and I ended up enjoying what I saw, and they offered me a job. So I took the job, and we built the product and so on. And about a year and a half into it, even though our product wasn't really selling fantastically, or we didn't have these massive customers, we got bought out for, I think, $400 million. I mean, this company, Catapulse is the name of the company. It was just simply, and I was aghast. How can we do this? And I thought the valuations of companies were amazingly, I didn't understand it. But that was an interesting time in the Valley. It was 2002, I think, around 2000. No, just before 2000. And then Rational Software bought us. Rational Software, again, got bought out by IBM, and I got rolled up into IBM. And that's where I spent quite a bit of time vesting. But it was interesting to see that the reason why that company succeeded was it was building software tools to build software technology at the right time when every company in the world wanted to build software, right? It didn't matter if you were running a small little company to sell groceries, or you were running Federal Express. Everybody needed software, and they needed to build new types of software that was going to basically change the world, right? And that company was valued based on its potential and its ability to produce, and that's what it got. And it got a huge valuation. So being at the right place with the right technology at the right time was what mattered. And even though I thought that the first company that did community stuff was more promising because we had better customers, bigger customers, wasn't the case. All right, finally, I'll just leave with this last set of things. And I think the last one at the bottom, the legend, the dream, the belief, is the most important. Because I believe one of the things I learned very quickly in Silicon Valley was when you get there and when I first arrived, there's this reality distortion field, that's Steve Jobs' words, that you think you can do it because you want to do it and you believe you can do it. You see it all around you. And that is the key for entrepreneurship. All the rest of the things are important, but the person that believes in themselves to be able to do what they can do is the absolute most important thing. And that's why I think a lot of you are here. Thank you very much.